believe that members should feel fully confident in my ability to ensure that they are given every and to the fullest extent of the rules that have been set forward by the House of Commons to bring, when they bring forward serious issues, such as harassment, especially sexual harassment, that it would be treated with the utmost seriousness and to the fullest extent possible.
Yet in the moment when you had an opportunity as a peer in the House of Commons to give a woman space and hear her argument out, your exact words were this: what happened was exactly as the Prime Minister had described it. If I came in and I said, this happened with a Liberal member or a Conservative member, whose side would you take?
I would clearly want to make sure that the process was entirely fair and that your story and that your concerns would be raised and pursued to the fullest possible extent.
How can I have that assurance?
That could happen.
How can I have that assurance
I'm
when you've had three clear instances of like being partisan while in the chair? Forget the fact that you were the Prime Minister's parliamentary secretary. Like, I'm saying this out of deep severity. That is, I believe you have lost my confidence because of this issue. You are in charge of the harassment policy, something that is very serious because it governs the workplace safety of everybody here. I just want to end with this. I don't understand why the NDP, given that this happened with one of their colleagues, is still propping you up. I don't get that. But again, I just want to give you, how could you in that moment, in showing a judge of fairness, supposed fairness, how could you arrive that this woman experienced it differently and that the Prime Minister, what basis did you use to make that comment in 2016?
Well, I can tell you that I never questioned Ruth Ann Brousseau's accounting of the situation.
You did. You said, I believe him, not I believe her. And that is what is wrong with every workplace around the world. And yet you demonstrated that in that moment. And deeply disappointing.
We have about 10 seconds left. Mr. Speaker, did you want to
just very quickly, once again, never doubted her accounting, and my characterization of it at the time was due to how other
gaslight
members...
me on that right now?
Mr. Rempel-Garner, I think either we have to let the clock run or we have to afford the Speaker the opportunity to respond. Mr. Speaker, did you want to take the last few seconds, or do you feel satisfied with the response?
I would just like to say that, again, just to make sure that the record stands, that my description of that event was an accounting of what other people had described her event, and not how she had put it on.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Romanato, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and through you, I'd like to thank the Speaker for being here today. So in the previous panel, we had some excellent testimony with respect to the harassment policy that currently does not apply between harassment between two members of Parliament. And we talked a little bit about the difference between having healthy debate in the chamber, bringing forward questions on policy, bringing forward recommendations to improve legislation, and sometimes a lack of civility in the House, and how that can be used outside of the House. So, as you know, in 1977, cameras were allowed into the chamber to allow Canadians to participate in debate and learn more about our democracy, which is incredibly important. But I also know that often when I'm in the chamber, it seems like it's theater. And I remember when I first got here, someone said that to me, question period is the theater. And it's for the clips that are used to then put on social media. You mentioned that anything that comments made outside of the chamber are not the purview of the Speaker. But if members of Parliament are taking clips from inside the chamber, putting them on their social media, that then generates sometimes unhealthy comments, what would you recommend? Is there anything that this committee could recommend to improve the civility in the House and understanding that the words that we use matter, that there are ramifications for sometimes the words that we use, and that some people out there are using that as a way to intimidate members of Parliament? Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. it's really important, once again, to note that the Speaker, according to the rules and the long-time tradition of this place, does not have a purview over what happens outside of the House, outside of committees. If, however, members, and this is the reason why I'm presuming that the committee had been struck to take a look at this issue, are free to propose solutions and perhaps could direct members themselves in determining what would be considered behavior that's unbecoming, could direct the Speaker to observe for that, but it has been a tradition that the Speaker doesn't go there for many reasons. And whatever this committee comes up with would have to be tempered, of course, with the long-standing traditions of this House to allow for as much as possible full and free ability to speak to issues. That is fundamental to the roles which we play as members of Parliament, and one that should always be looked at and should be minimized with the greatest of care.
Thank you. So, in terms of decorum in the House, we do have certain standing orders that members need to abide by. We can't question the integrity of a member. All members are honorable and so on. But we've noticed that it's getting harder and harder in the chamber for members to respect that. And we're seeing, especially I guess we're in what we call silly season, where tempers get a little flared in the House and so on. Do you think that we should be making some recommendations in the standing orders to include, for instance, you mentioned that we have the code of conduct for sexual harassment in the appendix of the standing orders. We also have the conflict of interest code in our appendix of the standing orders. But we do not have harassment between members in the current standing orders. We have free from molestation as a standing order, free from questioning the integrity, but we do not have harassment. Should we be amending the standing orders to include harassment amongst members?
That's going to be up to members. And I'm assuming that this committee is going to be doing that and proposing a report to all members in the House. So it will be up to you to determine, do you want to go beyond the sexual harassment rules that we set out and to consider harassment generally. And to do so, of course, tempered by the importance of allowing members to have as full a possible range of free speech. It could be... I think decorum and civility are really important. I think it is possible for us to have pointed and passionate debates, but one which does so within the confines that is respectful of the traditions of this place. And in fact, what those traditions end up being are traditions that I think that any constitutional democracy would consider appropriate. And so I think it allows us to continue in that best manner. So I'm really interested into what the work that this committee will do and to the people and the witnesses who you speak to and the recommendations that you'll have.
So on that last point,
Very quickly, Ms. Brown.
because this committee cannot, we can make recommendations, but I believe it's actually the Board of Internal Economy that would actually institute any recommendations, and I understand that the Speaker is on the Board of Internal Economy and chairs it. So given that we cannot, normally we table a committee report in the House and ask the government to respond, but because the government is not responsible for this, how would you suggest that we word any recommendations in our report to the House to make sure that we can get the adequate response?
Very simply, you would change you would make recommendations to the code of conduct of members, and then the board will, if adopted by the House, then or concurred by the House, then the board will act accordingly.
Thanks, Madam. Sorry? Yeah, very quickly, Mr.
Just
Jansen.
a quick clarification. Again, there's two things. There's the policy that falls under the jurisdiction of the board, and then there's the code, which falls under the jurisdiction of PROC and then recommended to the House. So again, if the idea is to change the code, that would fall within the jurisdiction of this committee, could report to the House, and if the House adopts it, then the annex to the standing orders would thereby be changed. If it's changes to the policy, the process would be for this committee write a letter with suggestions, recommendations to the board.
Thanks very much, Mr. Jans. Madame Gaudreau, à vous pour 6 minutes.
6 minutes. This is something that's very important, what we've just spoken about. Thank you very much, Chair, and I thank the Speaker for being with us this morning as well. I think we know each other well. We've been on PROC together, and I've been on PROC for 5 years, and myself. Things have changed in terms of the free deliberations in the House, but I have to also say that I am fearful of the climate in the House. There's been a great deal of slippage. Every week, I have students visiting me, and I have to do a debriefing with them afterwards because I'm ashamed of what they've seen. And if I were to ask a secret question, are you proud of who we are? I bet you'd answer, no, not at all. So how can we then respect this very relevant and interesting jousting match that we have between the government and the opposition without falling into the trap of harassment? We have seen what type of control we have over our social media. The Sergeant at Arms has said that there are some 800 requests, asks based on social media and what's written in social media. I have to tell you that this is slippage, and it's this is finished. It's got to come to an end. I would like. I can never say this. I'm a Quebecer, but I'm not want to say that I'm proud to be in the House of Commons as a Quebecer. But when I see what is said there and what happens there, even less so. Well, I'm losing my thread here. I, too, want to get to the end of the session to recharge my batteries to be able to rest. So my question. We're going to submit priorities. We will have a committee, maybe even include some members of Parliament on that committee to consider what we submit. But what can we do practically to stop this slide down the slippery slope that we have undertaken in the House of Commons? Thank you very much, Madame Gaudreau. I thank you for your candor, sharing your experience with the young students that come to the House of Commons to see what we do and see us in session. This is something that is of deep concern to me as Speaker. You're not the only one, you know. You're not the only one to wonder about this type of issue, to ask these questions. Because I've had discussions with members of all parties about this. Everybody is wondering what to do. As a member of Parliament, you have to make choices. You can have passionate, pointed discussions. You can ask for accountability from the government above others to answer questions that you put, clear questions. And you then create an environment where you debate ideas, but you do not attack the person. As a member of the Bloc Québécois, you know full well that here in Ottawa, ideas are important in Ottawa. It's up to all of us to burnish the debate, to make it better. And I believe we can do so. It helps when there is greater interaction, greater mingling amongst members, not just formally in our roles, our adversarial role facing each other. It helps to have a meal together. It helps to travel together on a parliamentary association trip, to get to know each other better. It's not something that is specific that you can put your finger on, that you can create regulations about, but it is truly important, and that is the tie that binds in our parliamentary system. Well, thank you for your answer. I can say that there is a power that each of us holds, but we also have the power to proceed with our deliberations. In the Bloc Québécois, respect is important. Freedom of expression is everywhere in our discussions in the Bloc. Never would we have to experience or live through what we have to live through in the House of Commons. I know that well as chair of our caucus. So I think there has to be a 180-degree turn taken here. Something has to be done about behavior, about the rules. Either we respect the standing orders or we don't. That's it. Thank you.
For 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Speaker, for appearing today. And I just wanted to say that ultimately I reference a point that actually Ms. Rempel-Gardner had brought forward in the previous panel, that it's important for us to not use this really important study to play partisan games. And so I'm glad to see you here within your role as the speaker of this institution. And give us advice in terms of as you see it in your experience. I did want to get to some of the things that you said, however, because it concerns me. I mean, there is this idea, of course, and we are all surrounded by those long-standing traditions, as you talked about it, that history, the incredible responsibility that we have to uphold that to some degree, but also to represent the people who sent us here, of which I am so incredibly proud all the time, but to make the changes that we need to help them to make their lives better. Those changes and this institution then has to evolve with the society that we do represent. So as an institution that is patriarchal, that is colonial, that is that has seen some dark times, as our society has. How do we ensure that we're doing both? How do we find that balance? Because this conversation about harassment hinges on that, I think. And it is about respect. It is about understanding that we are truly all equal. So how do we balance that?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, we do have some of the most, we have these traditions which long precede even the existence of Canada, which are important traditions. They've withstood the test of time. But we also have to try to make we always have to continually take a look at how can we modernize these institutions to make it more reflective of what Canadians live and work in each day in their own workplaces. But we need to make sure that we always have that balance. It's just not easy. I don't have a quick answer, but I do agree that it would be very useful.
So to me, there's this delineation. Ultimately, though, do we set forward some rules? Do we put our mind to putting forward written down rules? Or do we? There was sort of this idea that it seemed like we were getting to a point where this is about almost peer pressure, that we simply don't expect, or we have expectations of other members and they don't cross that line. Is that where we're at, in your opinion, as within your role?
Well, I think we can do both. So I think there is one aspect of it, of course, is that the committee can make recommendations to Parliament about changing the code of conduct of members and set out some guidelines. Not necessarily, you don't want a tax code of you shall not do this, in this kind of situation, but maybe some aspirational aspects as to what we would want members to live up to. And then allow, of course, the Board of Internal Economy to try to operationalize that, and then for members to pursue that. And then the other aspect of it is that, of course, there has to be some notion of peer pressure, I guess, from member to member in terms of what we would expect other members, how we comport ourselves, and how we would expect others to comport themselves.
I think that we do have an obligation to change this institution to be what it needs to be, what we want it to be, to simply, though, elect all kinds of incredible people from different diverse backgrounds and what have you, and to place them within the same old institution, to then make them almost a victim of that and those long-standing potential dark histories is a problem. So are there mechanisms, could we consider what electoral reform would bring to that? Should we consider consensus building in more of an indigenous tradition of how this place operates? How difficult would that be? Really difficult.
That's a really big question, Ms. Matheson. But 5 seconds. So look, I'll just say it really, really quickly. I have a minute. All right then. Thank you. I would say a couple of things. Let's not completely turn our back. This institution has evolved. It has evolved significantly over the last 157 years. Has it evolved? Does it always match to the times in which they live in? No. There is a lag, but it has evolved, and it has evolved, I think, for reasons that you pointed out, because we're electing more people more women, for example, has made a significant difference on what it would be to be a member of Parliament today for London Fanshawe as opposed to your predecessor, and how she might have felt back in the day. So there has been change. But what we're trying to do here is to take a look, can we go further? And the challenge, and I think the real objective for all of us here is, can you negotiate yourself into a new sweet spot? Can you propose something that respects the traditions, but yet allows for this modernization, which is so necessary? And that's a challenge. I don't think there's going to be an easy solution here.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm used to you giving me the, time is running out. It's nice to return the favor. Mr. Giovanni, it's over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Speaker, so your job is to oversee the parliamentary precinct, to be a referee in the House of Commons, and to oversee the House of Commons harassment policy. When performing these duties, would you agree that it's important to remain neutral?
Of course, I would agree that it's important to remain impartial. I hope all the decisions that I've pronounced in this place would be judged by any fair-minded person as being decisions that could stand the test of time and that were impartial.
So as part of this, you no longer attend the weekly meetings with Liberal MPs, caucus meetings, for example?
Absolutely.
With regard to the harassment policy, would you agree with me that it's important for the accuser and the accused to have confidence that they will be treated fairly according to the harassment policy, regardless of what party that they're a member of?
I would hope that they would feel that the process that was set up was one which allows them to both be able to feel free to express themselves, to raise the issues, and for it to be properly disputed.
So today there's an ongoing debate about your partisan actions and whether you should remain a speaker. There'll be a vote later today on that. The story for the fundraising event and the highly partisan language used was that it went out in error and that it was a commonly used template. Have you been given assurances from the Liberal Party that this is in fact the story and that this template was widely used by other MPs?
So you'll forgive me, Mr. Giovanni, but this is a matter which is before the House. it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on it right now before the House pronounces on this.
Okay, so if you haven't been given that assurance, or at least we can't confirm right now that you have been, do you think that MPs who want confidence and trust in the harassment policy should be concerned about the judgment of the Liberal Party in using the office of the Speaker for partisan purposes?
Again, Mr. Giovanni, you're putting me in a very uncomfortable situation. I would love to be able to comment on this issue. It just wouldn't be appropriate for me to do so when this matter is before the House.
Okay. Well, why don't we zoom out then? We can zoom out to make you a little more comfortable from what we're talking about in the House today. Just generally speaking, do you have a policy on how to avoid this sort of partisanship from bleeding into your activities as the Speaker of the House?
As was discussed before this committee, and as was reported on before this committee back in December, and it was reported to the House at the end of January, there are a whole bunch of recommendations on that front, and there are general guidelines which are provided for in the rules of procedure. But as was, I believe, if you were to take a look at the committee report, you will discover that there was a conclusion that these guidelines were vague at best.
I would say it is unfortunate that when we're discussing an important policy like this one, that the discussion is sort of marred by your inability to address some of these concerns. And I would just recall that following your address to the Ontario Liberal Party Convention, which also raised concerns about partisanship, you said it was an error and apologized. Following the most recent partisan intervention, you said it was an error and it won't happen again. Before MPs vote tonight on if you should remain chair, why should we believe you?
It's a long-standing tradition in this House, of course, that when members withdraw or apologize for a comment, that the member is taken at his or her word.
I'd like to see the remainder of my time to my colleague.
Okay, Monsieur Berthold.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Fergus. Merci de votre présence. Je vous écoute depuis le début.
Thank you, Speaker, for being here. I've listened carefully to you since the beginning of the meeting. You've spoken about decorum, about the intent of members when they make remarks. You are at the very heart of another question of privilege concerning your partisanship. Partisanship in the House of Commons as well as outside of the House of Commons. You have a somewhat elastic idea of what partisanship seems to mean. You are supposed to be the arbiter of debate. You adjudicate the debate. And you have to look to the intentions of the members in the House. But you find yourself faced with issues that have never before surfaced for any Speaker of the House. Why do you think that you should maintain the speakership? Well, as I said to your colleague from Durham, I cannot speak to this matter that is before the House. It is before the House right now. Well, when do you think it's time to resign? Well, sir, that is an issue, a matter that is before the House. But your personal perception, no, Mr. Berthold. I would like to give you a few more minutes, but there is no more time for you at this time. Madame Fortier, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. And going back to the matter that we are studying today, I thank the Speaker for being here today. With your experience, I'm sure that you can help us better understand the issue before us. Here is my question. Behavior in the House that goes beyond debate, that transmits a notion of harassment. Would you be able to give us some answers about any instances of that? That is an excellent question, Madame Fortier. I can say to you that as a member since 2015 and as Speaker, I can say this. There are times when I wonder myself, does this moment go beyond what is acceptable? I can say this. I'm always concerned by tradition and by the standing orders of the House. They're very important. But I do ask myself this question. The behavior between members of Parliament of any party, of all parties, is that behavior acceptable, and would it be acceptable in any other work environment? I would think the answer is no. However, this isn't like just any other work environment. We are debating ideas that involve confrontation. They're conflicting ideas sometimes, pointed questions, unexpected things, but is that acceptable? Well, as Speaker, have you seen anything in the House, or have you had any experience as Speaker in the chair where you've seen harassment demonstrated by other members? Or I'm just trying to keep this within the House itself. I can't speak directly in answering your question. I can't. And each and every day I have to evaluate the matter. For me, I look at the standing orders of the House. I look at is it that as the framework, and is the behavior there, or what is being said, does that fit into the framework? Would I or anybody else occupying the chair feel free to request a change in behavior from the Member of Parliament? Well, I don't have much time left. I know that there is much that is before us. So the question that my Bloc colleague asked is a question that is preventive in nature. Do you think that there are certain things that can be done to prevent the situations we find ourselves in? Well, it's social media. That goes well beyond what the chair can do. But if members of Parliament were to decide to give that power to the chair, well, otherwise, the Speaker cannot be a judge and jury on everything that occurs outside of the House itself. As to your initial question, do I have suggestions? If I were in your shoes, if I were in your place, I think that it would be more useful to have a code of behavior rather than a volume of all the things that are not to be done, that should not be done. It would be too complicated, much too complicated. Thank you very much.
Merci. Madame Gaudreau, à vous pour
2.5 minutes, Madame Gaudreau. Well, thank you very much, Chair. As we have heard, and given what we've heard, is it possible to know what we can draw as a conclusion from this meeting? What can be done for members of Parliament and their behavior? What can lead us to dream of a change in behavior in the House of Commons? Well, today, I think that all the pieces are there. The pieces of the puzzle are there, and that should allow us to finish the puzzle. We all have to be disciplined. Self-discipline is something that each and every one of us has to demonstrate. Ms. Matheson, in her question, was coming to that point. I think that there is a need to modernize our code. And in that modernization, we have to bear in mind that we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can't ignore the traditions of this place. Tradition has survived for very good reasons. I think that the work may not be absolutely perfect, the first draft of that work, but we keep at it. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You have 40 seconds or 30 seconds left. Do you want to use them? I am done.
The beneficiary of an extra 30 seconds. So 3 minutes to you.
Music to my ears. Just to build off of that, where we were going before, has there ever been any look? Often, and thankfully, the government uses a GBA plus lens to look at budgets, and within this institution, has that ever been done for Parliament, for that code of conduct, for standing orders, for the things that govern us and each other?
That's a very good question. I'm the new kid on the block, so I'm going to ask my clerk or perhaps Ms. Evangelidis if we could respond to this question.
And certainly not for the standing orders and the like. I don't know if we do in terms of some of the policies that are developed.
No, we don't. There is a best practice, of course, from a policy perspective. Usually it's to review things within 3 to 5 years, I would say. So that is something that you might want to consider as you move forward. The current code has been reviewed in 2018 and has not yet. So.
Okay. The other question I had, Mr. Speaker, you're responsible for all of the workers who serve this institution overall. Have you heard, or has there been any concerns voiced to you from them as to the impact that what we are seeing within the chamber, within committee overall, the violence, the harassment, and so on, upon the workers who serve with such incredible pride this institution? Is there a mechanism to have that either, actually?
Well, I've been very fortunate in the time that I've been in the chair that I've taken effort to try to meet all of our 2,600 employees, to meet with them, to chat with them, to take time to learn more about their jobs and what they think of how we can improve. And we have regular processes, and I'm very pleased that the House has also set up formal processes for us to do that. Mr. Chair, I hope I'm not going over too much of the time, but I've heard members of the employees here love to work here. They're proud to work here. And I've heard concerns that they've expressed about the nature of the debate. I don't know if they can define exactly what's going on, but I think everybody feels that it might be going a little bit too far sometimes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that concludes our last panel today. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for availing yourself to the committee here today on this important study. Again, thank you to those other witnesses who have joined. Colleagues, we're going to suspend for 1 minute, and then we're going right into committee business to deal with a few other matters. And we're going to try to get through that quickly so that folks can prepare for question period. So we're suspended for back in our meeting here. If I could ask everyone to take their seats, please. See, Mr. Cooper, just 1 sec. So, colleagues, I received, as you did, a letter a few days ago requesting an emergency meeting from more than 4 members of 2 parties, which means that the committee must, according to standing orders, grant permission of that meeting. My understanding is that there have been productive negotiations between the parties with the intention of addressing the nature of that emergency meeting. Our hope collectively is that we will be able to work through the nature of the substance of why it was that meeting was called in the next few minutes. If we can't, rest assured, colleagues, the 1064, which is the standing order we referred to for an emergency meeting, will be honored, and we will come back later this afternoon to address and continue should we not get there. But the goal of this exercise right now was to try to save us all from having to come back later this afternoon while still satisfying the nature of the emergency meeting. With that, Mr. Cooper, I recognize that you would like the floor, and I pass it to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will move the motion that has been put on notice, and I'm going to read it into the record, and then I will make some brief remarks. The motion is as follows, that further to the Globe and Mail report of May 23rd, 2024, which revealed that the Liberal cabinet is withholding an undisclosed number of documents requested by the Commissioner of the Public Inquiry into Foreign Interference in Federal Electoral Processes and Democratic Institutions, and that nearly 10% of documents provided to the Commission by the Cabinet contain redactions, and in relation to its study of foreign election interference, the Committee, A, pursuant to Standing Order 108 3C4, report to the House that, in its opinion, the Cabinet should provide to the Commissioner of the Public Inquiry into Foreign Interference in Federal Electoral Processes and Democratic Institutions all documents requested by the Commissioner without redaction. B, invite the following witnesses to appear. 1, the Honorable Dominic LeBlanc, Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions, and Intergovernmental Affairs for 2 hours. 2, the appropriate representatives from the Privy Council office for 1 hour. 3, the appropriate representatives from the Foreign Interference Commission for 1 hour. 4, Dan Stanton, former manager at the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service for 1 hour. And C, after considering this witness testimony, report its findings on this matter to the House. And so that is the motion that has been put on the table. Mr. Chair, the cover-up continues. After the Prime Minister got caught turning a blind eye to Beijing's interference in our elections, the Prime Minister for months fought tooth and nail against holding a public inquiry. He went so far as to appoint a long-standing family friend as a fake rapporteur to produce a whitewash report to shield him from accountability for failing to act on multiple briefings from CSIS and the Security and Intelligence Establishment about Beijing's interference, including in the 2019 and 2021 elections, because such interference benefited the Liberal Party and the Prime Minister was prepared to turn a blind eye to it. He did turn a blind eye to it and covered it up until he got caught and then appointed Mr. Johnson. Now, when the findings of the Prime Minister's fake rapporteur did not hold up to scrutiny, the Prime Minister finally, after months of calls from Conservatives, succumbed and established a national inquiry, and Madam Justice Hogg was appointed as the commissioner of that inquiry. And at the time of the appointment of Madam Justice Hogg, Minister LeBlanc reassured that the government would cooperate with the inquiry. Minister LeBlanc was quoted as saying, quote, Justice Hogg will have full access to all relevant cabinet documents as well as all other information she deems relevant for the purposes of her inquiry, end of quote. Well, Mr. Chair, that has turned out not to be true. Minister LeBlanc said that the government would fully cooperate, that it would turn over all relevant documents to Madam Justice Hogg, but we now find out that that hasn't happened. In a report of May 23rd, 2024 in the Globe and Mail, entitled Trudeau Cabinet Withholding Documents on Foreign Interference from Inquiry, a spokesperson for the Prime Minister's Department, the PCO, acknowledges that 10% of cabinet documents turned over to the Commissioner have been redacted, and that there are a further undisclosed number of cabinet documents that have not been turned over at all. And it is evident that these are documents that Madam Justice Hogg has requested, and it's evident based upon the footnote in her first report, in which there is mention of ongoing discussions about documents that Madam Justice Hogg has requested that the Prime Minister's Department has not turned over. Madam Justice Hogg is to fulfill her mandate. It is important that she receive all of the documents that she has requested. And I will remind members of the committee through you, Mr. Chair, that part of the mandate of Madam Justice Hogg is to look at what the Prime Minister, what the Cabinet knew, when they learned of it, and the actions or inaction that they took respecting Beijing's interference in our democracy. And in order to scrutinize that and evaluate that and report on that, as is the mandate of Madam Justice Hogg, it is important for her to know what information the Cabinet had. Not parts of the information, but all of the information. And what decisions stemmed from the information that was before the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, information that is being withheld from Madam Justice Hogg. In short, contrary to what has turned out to be the false reassurance of Minister LeBlanc that the government would cooperate with the Commission, what we have is a continuation of the cover-up, of withholding now documents to obstruct the work of Commissioner Hogg. This is completely unacceptable, and it is why we have brought forward the 1064 letter and have put forward this motion to get to the bottom of this obstruction. It is imperative that we hear from Minister LeBlanc and we hear from the Prime Minister's Department, and we hear from the representative from the inquiry itself, because it is important that the obstruction end and that all documents relevant and that are requested by Madam Justice Hogg are in fact turned over to her. And I hope that this committee can reach agreement in moving forward so that we can commence such hearings.
Thanks very much, Mr. Cooper. So we will begin debate on the motion that you've moved. If there are speakers, there are. Ms. Romanato.
Let me just put that on the right plate. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I actually had a conversation with Mr. Cooper, and I thank him for bringing forward the motion. And we actually have an amendment that I will circulate to the committee. I will read out what the amendment is to Mr. Cooper's motion. So it would be removing Part A. With respect to Section B, Section B1, we keep the Honourable Dominic LeBlanc, Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs, and add with Nathalie Drouin, Deputy Clerk of the Privy Council and National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister for 1 hour. Remove C. Remove D, and a new C would be after considering this witness testimony, report its findings on this matter to the House, and pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests a government response. So I will send that to the clerk right now so that he could forward it along. And the rationale behind that is obviously with respect to the appropriate representative from the Foreign Interference Commission, because the Commission is actually sitting right now and it is ongoing. I don't think it's appropriate for the person to come and testify. And obviously we would like to have the government's response to this. So that's why we're including that as well in that. Now with respect to A, obviously can't agree with that, but I'm amenable to some feedback from colleagues on that. So you should be receiving that momentarily, and hope we can maybe get somewhere so that we can settle this today and start that study. Thank you.
Mr. Calkins, over to you. Ms. Matheson.
I'm not surprised, but I'm disappointed that a well-thought-out, well-articulated, well-crafted motion by my colleague, Mr. Cooper, could not simply be accepted by the committee because on the face of it, it looks completely reasonable. And the arguments made by Mr. Cooper, I think, are valid. The notion was made by so many members around this committee that we couldn't trust the parliamentary law clerk to go through unredacted documents and make a determination as to what documents could be received by this committee when we were studying the foreign interference matter, both in the context of the privilege motion for Mr. Chong and writ large the foreign interference election study that was happening at that time. So here we are again. The notion would have been that, and the argument was made that this committee is too partisan, this place is too partisan, so we need a public inquiry, even though that public inquiry was actually initially rejected ad nauseum until it became so obvious through whistleblowers that this needed to happen. And the argument was made that, well, we can't trust the parliamentary law clerk, we can't trust this committee, we can't trust anybody but a commissioner, in this case Justice Hogue, and she has, to my knowledge, every security clearance that she needs to see all of these documents, and yet the government still doesn't trust the Madam Justice that they have actually selected, that we have agreed to lead this commission. There is no, this government does not trust. And one can only be left with the inescapable conclusion that the government has something to hide. They don't trust the parliamentary law clerk, who would have, in my opinion, far greater experience in dealing with what parliamentarians could or couldn't see or what the public should or shouldn't see. But now this has been offshored to the commission, and the same blocking of this information is evident by the proposed amendment to my colleague's motion. And I don't know why my colleagues would presume to know whether or not representatives from the Foreign Interference Commission shouldn't come here. We're not compelling them to come here. We're simply saying they should be invited. I would imagine that somebody from the commission, Madame Hogue, or her representative, would be mature enough to decide whether or not it's in the commission's interest to come to the committee on this particular issue. But we're not even going to grant Madame Hogue that opportunity, or her representative that opportunity, based on the amendment from the Liberals in this case. And we believe that Mr. Stanton would have valuable insights to provide this committee about what information the Commission would need in order to fulfill the second mandate of the terms of reference that Madame Hogue has, which is to issue a final report by the end of this year. Time is of the essence on this particular issue because this House will be adjourning for summer in a matter of weeks. And these are 4 witnesses. It's a couple of committee meetings at most. It's committee meetings that our chair has aptly shown us that he's able to get extra time and resources for, with all of the other workload that we have. And I think we should reject this amendment by Ms. Romanato and proceed with the motion in its original form put forward by Mr. Cooper. There is nothing unreasonable about that motion, and we now find ourselves in this debate again. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, colleagues, I'm seeing that there are some discussions which I'm led to believe are productive and may get us to our ultimate objective. I'm going to suspend very briefly so that these conversations can take place more seamlessly, and I hope when we come back we'll at least have some direction as to whether we're going to vote on the matter or whether we're going to have to move into the afternoon. So we're suspended for a very brief moment. The time has really run out for us to be able to negotiate the proposed amendment any further. So we have not satisfied the spirit of the emergency meeting that has been called. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjourn. I'm going to adjourn.
Then you don't have to, we don't have to put everything back on paper.
Well, I understood there was some different direction from the clerk. Give me 1 second, okay? Okay, colleagues, so just for clarity, there are some logistics on the back end of the committee that make it a little bit more complicated if we suspend. But I want to reassure committee members that if we adjourn, which we are going to do in a moment, that we will still have the emergency meeting, the 1064. We have the resources allocated for that meeting later this afternoon. Now, on that note, we are expecting a series of votes this afternoon. So we do have assurances that we still have the resources even if those votes run long, because the chances of us coming at 3:30